Girl by Moonlight, the much-awaited magical girl genre-based Blades in the Dark variant from Evil Hat Games, made by Andrew Gillis, and a bunch of other people, don't forget them. You know Blades in the Dark? No? Well, there are a bunch of other videos I've done about the game system, even when talking about other unrelated systems. The super brisk description is that it's a fail-forward, fiction-first, open-sourced TTRPG that's really good at driving stories based on their genre markers and the way stories in its vibe feel, with really good systems for breaking some of the rules of tabletop RPGs, most significantly in who gets to determine how players do things, and whether the flow of time is linear. Which it isn't. It's about magical girls. What are magical girls? Well, sometimes they're magical and sometimes they're girls, but also they're not necessarily either of those things, even if they are magical girls. Magical boy is still part of the magical girl genre because genres are dumb. Magical girl shows have a super interesting long-form lineage that reaches back, no jokes, to the 1960s American sitcom Bewitched. And, well, at least that's what TV Tropes tells me, and why would they lie? Anyway, the genre isn't something built out of a single high concept, but rather lots of individual signifiers that show a relationship within a space. And oh boy, we'll get to that later, because there are more magical girl shows than you think. Girl by Moonlight stakes a claim on this front real fast by using a genre system to decide this type of game you're going to play. Sure, you can start with the classics of the genre, your Universes Steven and your Moons of Sailor. But there's also a genre form for the dark genre of magical girls, like, well, Puella Magica Madoka. But we're not done there, with the addition of spacefaring, mecha-based magical girl shows, where people have mecha powered by love and friendship. This is your Escaflowne-style magical girl story, where your feelings can change reality. And then there's door number 4, where we get a mix of conspiracy and cyber magic. If you know Lane, or Persona 5, or Paprika. Those kind of magical girls. As I write this script, Girl by Moonlight is not out. It's out in that if you go to backerkit and pledge to pay, you can get a PDF of its current state, and I think it's a good deal. It's a really high production value project, as it is right now, at least by my standards. Consider all the time I spent reading indie TTRPGs off itch for this channel, where I sometimes feel the need to bully a book for having a 20-page long index or having its character creation in the back half of the book. I recommend you check it out if you are at all interested in Blades in the Dark hacks like Brinkwood and Scum and Villainy. That opinion, however, is the opinion of someone who has a pretty healthy bookshelf, both digital and not, of RPGs that I don't ever expect to get to the table. I have no experience with putting Girl by Moonlight, and I don't intend to grab it because it's a different lick of paint on a game I already know I like. There are plenty of those, and 2 of them at the top levels of production, Band of Blades and Thirsty Sword Lesbians, completely miss me, because I don't find the flavor of their narratives that they offer interesting. No, I want Girl by Moonlight for 2 important reasons. 1, I know a bunch of magical girls, and I hope they think it's neat. And 2, it 2-for-1's a problem I have with Blades in the Dark, and neatly smacks out of the park the single biggest concern I have with the philosophical footing of stories about magical girls in how it handles trauma. In the base game of Blades in the Dark, trauma conditions are a byproduct of accruing too much stress. When you take trauma, you get one from the core list. Cold, you're not moved by emotional appeals or social bonds. Haunted, you're often lost in reverie, reliving past horrors, seeing things. Obsessed, you're enthralled by one thing, an activity, a person, an ideology. Paranoid, you imagine danger everywhere, you can't trust others. Reckless, you have a little regard for your own safety or best interests. Soft, you lose your edge, you become sentimental, passive, gentle. Unstable, your emotional state is volatile. You can instantly rage or fall into despair, act impulsively, or freeze up. Vicious. You seek out opportunities to hurt people, even for no good reason. Now, these are all presented to you as trauma responses, so much so that if you play in a way that reflects your trauma, you get bonus XP for it. These are incentivized choices for your character as responses to trauma and, what if you were already haunted? What if you were already a leech with schizophrenia who heard voices but was handling it? You don't get XP for behaving like you had schizophrenia before, but if you get it as a trauma and it starts causing problems for you, then you suddenly do get XP for acting that way. It's not that Blades in the Dark doesn't have room for someone who has these conditions to start with, but the only concern it has for people with these conditions are the ways they make you worse at your job, the way they represent a ticking clock on your overall lifespan. It's not like these conditions can't be traumagenic either, but when the only presence of a thing in the game rules is explicitly as a traumagenic impediment that you're meant to play up to emphasize the lack of time you have left, it does outline that in this space, if you want those conditions not as drawbacks like that, then you probably should have the drawbacks. On the one hand, I can understand entirely how Blades in the Dark got there. It seems at first like an interesting idea, where the experiences of failure and loss in this marginalized, oppressed state leaves you all broken up and shaken. Thing is, that's a thing that you experience when you're someone to whom these are externalities. They're not lived experiences, so the idea of developing a new modality of living can feel as if it's only something imposed. And vitally, because it's meant to represent a depletion of a resource, these traumas can never be overcome or accommodated. That's a bummer. It's not something I think of as a fundamental hard problem. No advocate for the rights of people with these conditions would ever dare to advocate for the position that nobody ever gains these conditions traumagenically. It's entirely possible for your story to be one about absorbing these punishments, suffering, and then deciding to tap out of the attempts to change your situation. That doesn't have to bring with it that these trappings, this language and framing of these things is fundamentally an unrecoverable loss of self. I mean, heck, the nature of Blades in the Dark, where 3 strikes and you're out, indicates that about 2/3 of the rogues you deal with are going to be people who have these conditions who still get to be perfectly good experts at their jobs. Anyway, so I don't like trauma in Blades in the Dark. There's a phenomenon in Magical Girl discourse, and I say phenomenon because it's a fancier way to say stupid idea. And I want to make it clear here, audience of mine, that I am talking primarily about and to dudes who want to talk about magical girls as a genre, and specifically about the struggle of being taken seriously. This isn't a story for everyone. It is a story, however, that maps out in my life. Let me explain my history with magical girls. The first experience I had with magical girls was on free-to-air TV in the 1990s, before school, when I could watch unsupervised in a room in a school building, waiting the 2 hours before the other students got there. There were 2 dueling TV shows, Cheese TV and Agro's Cartoon Connection. In any given bracket, you had to pick between which of these 2 kids' TV shows were going to put up, and there were clear winners and losers depending upon the time frame. I didn't realize at the time because I was becoming a big anime fan at this point, particularly the dubs of Technoman, Tekkaman Blade, and Robotech, a bunch of shows in an overcoat, were screened this way, and I loved those shows. There was continuity, they had these building stories, and I remember feeling really mature and adult because I got that, because I saw a continuity between these things. I really liked them. And in this space, there was this show, Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon made me uncomfortable. I liked watching it, but also I didn't like how the voice acting felt. I remembered feeling a lot like there was something artificial or fake in the voices, the way that they sped up talking in ways that didn't seem right. I didn't realize I was already noticing bad voice direction. But it was a show about cute girls, and one of them was kind of dumb, and I felt like I shouldn't be watching it because it was a show about cute girls, and I liked that. As a direct result of that, and being teased by other students who found out about me watching it, let's not pretend I arrived at this conclusion entirely on my own, I watched Sailor Moon, but not much of it. I wasn't here for a story about these girls who changed forms to reveal superpowers. I was busy watching much better, more interesting stuff like Transformers and the Power Rangers. As I grew into an anime fan, as I watched more of it, I wound up watching very little magical girl stuff. What little stuff I saw tended to be something I avoided. It was a thing over there. It was a show type that I didn't engage with because they weren't for me. They weren't interesting. They didn't have interesting things in them. I did watch Mahotsukai Tai, which is absolutely a magical girl show, but I did watch it because I was trying to impress a girl, and then because I had a crush on a boy in it. The genre? No. I didn't do anything with that. The genre didn't really exist. It was over there. It was girl stuff. Then I watched Madoka, and I want to say I had complex feelings on it, because I didn't really click with it, and I missed some important details. I didn't see the endings and the openings, which kind of add some important information. I think I just didn't like it very much, but then I think to impress a girl, I tried to spend a lot of time thinking about it. But that meant I was positioned to see Madoka as a subject, and I saw it becoming a subject, and a subject enjoyed and extolled by a lot of people like me. There was this particular form of discourse you'd get where dudes would talk about something in a general sense, like they were experts. They'd even deliver their opinions with the cadence of a 4chan post, and people who didn't recognize that form, who thought of these opinions as serious, considered it almost from a sort of gutter expertise, didn't realize it. It didn't stand out unless you were steeped in those places to realize that most of what the voice meant was that the person had already laundered the opinion back and forth enough to see if it was adequately acceptable to the hive mind of default boys. And they thought Madoka was great. Because Madoka was dark. Because Madoka was a deconstruction of the magical girl genre. It wasn't bad like other magical girls shows were. It was a real magical girl show. It had guns, and it was cool, and it was badass, and the whole thing was all about sacrifice and trauma. And to be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand Madoka. The Yuri is extremely subtle, and without a solid grasp of time travel physics, most of the narrative will go over a typical viewer's head. And I mean, that made sense to me at the time. It's a deconstruction, I told myself. That's why it's complicated. And then I said that aloud, and that seemed like a smart opinion to have. Hell if I know now, really. If I knew or just thought that was true then. Because it's not really a deconstruction if it's just doing things other magical girl shows are doing, and I don't know what other magical girl shows are doing. I could tell that it was different in some way to what I expected, but rather than examine that or consider my expectations or my own ignorance, I asserted that this magical girl show was good because it was not a magical girl show. There's a Wikipedia article on the genre of magical girl. The most recent show in that simplified list that I've seen is Madoka. The next most recent magical girl show I watched was My Hime. And if you asked me if My Hime was a magical girl show, I would have laughed about how it obviously wasn't. These girls have mecha, and I like that show. Revolutionary Girl Utena? A magical girl show? No, it's a psychological horror story that deconstructs the idea of handsome prince narratives. Slayers? No. Slayers is a gag fantasy anime. They're not magical girl shows, despite being very much about girls who are magical. They're something else. These definitional arguments are part of why I'm so dismissive of definitional arguments these days, by the way. That's all we were doing. We were looking at media we liked and a label we didn't like and tried to shoulder charge our way around it so it doesn't count as being a magical girl series. I tried at the time to argue that Magic Knight's Rayearth didn't count because the characters didn't transform properly. Point is, we could tell Madoka was different. We couldn't tell you why, but we could tell it was better, and we attributed the way that Madoka was better was that the way it was serious, and that seriousness was expressed very consistently in that Madoka was traumatizing. People acted out of trauma. Trauma was inflicted. Characters were trauma babies, and the ending showed that healing wasn't even possible. The only way to escape the trauma was to forget it ever happened. Isn't that tragic and serious and, good? And this is the stupid thing I wanted to talk about. That we legitimize interest in a show for and about girls only because of how we asserted its reliance on trauma. The concerns and interest of girls in other stories, which we also did not watch, were not important because we did not value those stories, because we said they were not traumatic. Trauma gave us the edge to grip a hold of this work and to treat it as important. Girl by Moonlight doesn't use the trauma system. It does use something a bit like it, but not really. In Girl by Moonlight, instead of trauma breaking your character, you get instead a system called eclipse. Eclipse is explicitly a phenomenon of the magical girl. It is a thing that happens to your magical girl characters because they are magical girl characters and they relate to your archetype, your place in the story. Eclipse is there to generate the moments that fit your role in a story. Eclipse is a representation of struggling with inner turmoil under stress. It's not explicitly linked to psychological trauma in the same way. It can be a mistaken impression, a belief formed out of seeing the wrong thing at the wrong time. In fact, the core expression of Eclipse by the rules text is that they are not about your brain doing you wrong, but rather about responding to the way society demands you comply. Girl by Moonlight is a game in which your characters are taught to hate themselves by society. And we live in one of those. Eclipse is also different from Trauma in that it presents an opportunity for someone else to help grab you out of the condition. Players can spend energy and effort on keeping you from falling into Eclipse, and that has a low-key, sneaky side effect of ensuring that most characters hover near the same amount of stress and the same proximity to Eclipse, which does mean you can have stories about a catastrophic sequence of failures or a story about people pulling each other back from the brink in the darkest hour. That's cool. There's more to the gamebook, of course. It's not as simple as just, hey, it's Blades in the Dark with one different system. The way that the group share a genre seat, not a gang sheet, that signifies the story centers around you and you're not one of a group of types. That's great. Or the way that the Eclipse system stacks, so you can be eclipsed and eclipsed and therefore be lost. The archetypes are great too, with every character positioned to consider themselves and their alternative identity as a creative act. And if you know me, you know I love some heroic identity as creative expression, gosh dang it. Girl by Moonlight is currently available on backerkit. I like it, and I like some of the choices it's making in its systems. I like what it's thinking about, and I like how it's different from Blades in the Dark, which I also like. And even if you don't check it out and find a new favorite game, consider what kinds of things you're assuming are necessary for a story to be worth respecting.